Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Major Anna Sharma had been in enough rooms to recognize silence when it was sharpened into a weapon. She sat at the edge of the long, scarred wooden table, her uniform immaculate, her posture precise, and yet she might as well have been a ghost. The younger officers traded glances and inside jokes around her, their laughter quick and brittle like rifle cracks carried off by the mountain wind. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She simply waited. Out here, waiting was a language of its own. FOB Nightingale wasn't much to look at, a scatter of prefabricated shelters clinging stubbornly to the mountainside, as if steel and concrete could anchor themselves against the Hindu Kush. The air was razor thin, searing her lungs with every breath. Dust clung to her boots, her skin, even her eyelashes. A world of stone and sky and cold indifference. The young soldiers thrived on the energy of it, bouncing between duties with bravado. But when they saw her, the silver oak leaf pinned to her collar, the age lines at the corners of her eyes, they turned away. 43 years old, logistics, a paper officer parachuted into their world of rifles and adrenaline. She knew the judgment before they ever spoke it, too old, too soft, too late. She could hear the distant barking of a drill sergeant on the Kill House range, that voice grinding against the air like stone on stone. A sound that stirred something buried deep in her chest, not nostalgia, not fear, but recognition. Her eyes drifted toward the course itself, even as the meeting droned on. From her seat she could see the outline of the modular structure. Doors, windows, angles, lines of fire, patterns of movement. Her mind moved without her permission, calculating every wasted step, every second lost to hesitation. And then she blinked, steadying her gaze back on the map in front of her. She wasn't here for that, not anymore. The base commander, Colonel Marcus Thorne, didn't bother to disguise his disdain. He had flipped through her file like it was dead weight on his desk. Logistics major, supply chain specialist, a career cushioned by the safe distance of offices and shipments. In his world, brass who couldn't bleed were ballast, and yet she had orders. That alone forced his tolerance. Every billet here is critical, Thorne had told her, his voice low and grinding, meant to remind her where she stood. I need rifles, medics, scouts. What I don't need is more staff overhead. Your work could be done 1,000 miles from here. She hadn't argued. She hadn't defended herself. Instead, she had delivered numbers, supply losses, terrain variables, local transport failures, in a voice so level it unnerved him. Data, not excuses. Precision, not apology. That had irritated him more. Because the truth he refused to admit, even to himself, was simple. There was something about her he couldn't place. The scars on her knuckles. The stillness that wasn't weakness but coiled restraint. The silence she carried into his office like it belonged to her. He had tried to push her into irrelevance, but somehow she had left him unsettled instead. Invisible to his soldiers, but not to him. She walked the base like a shadow, long hours in the supply depot, clipboard in hand, inventorying every crate as if the chaos of the world could be ordered by sheer will. She reorganized, relabeled, and rebuilt a system no one else had bothered to tame. At first the depot staff smirked at her, a major stooping to count bolts and batteries. But slowly their laughter faded because order followed her. Rows aligned. Losses shrank. Efficiency sharpened. She worked with the quiet rhythm of inevitability. And still, in her spare moments, she drifted back toward the Kill House. Always watching, always silent. Master Sergeant Henderson owned that ground. A mountain of a man with a voice designed to break recruits, he was the hammer in a world he saw as full of nails. His soldiers loved him, feared him, lived for his approval. He barked, he broke, he rebuilt. And when he ran the course himself, he was unstoppable. 1 minute 24 seconds the record, no one else close. He wore it like armor, like proof that he was king of this narrow kingdom. But Anna saw something different. She watched him kick open doors with brute force, storm corners wide, clear rooms with power and momentum. His technique was dominant, but it bled time. Tiny wasted motions invisible to anyone else stood out to her like flares in the dark. He was fast, but fast wasn't the same as efficient. She didn't judge him, she simply studied him. Private Ortega noticed her sometimes, the same private who had carried her bag on her first day, cheeks flushed with nervous embarrassment. He caught her eyes fixed on the kill house, her coffee cooling in her hand as soldiers thundered through with their clumsy adrenaline. When he asked, half shy, half curious, "Learning some tricks, ma'am," she had answered without looking at him. Every moment is an opportunity to learn. And then she had gone back to watching. It was record day when Henderson's patience finally cracked. Soldiers circled the kill house, their boots crunching on gravel, their laughter echoing between steel walls. Smoke from training rounds lingered in the cold air. Henderson roared, stopwatch in hand, mocking his men with merciless humor. No one came close to his time. No one ever did. Then he spotted her, standing quiet at the edge of the crowd, coffee in hand. As always. And suddenly, the weight of her calm presence pressed against his chest. He couldn't ignore it anymore. "Major," his voice boomed across the yard, silencing laughter in an instant. Dozens of heads turned toward her. "This isn't a spectator sport. Supply depot, that way." The dismissal was brutal public. Soldiers smirked. Henderson expected her to flush, to retreat with mumbled apologies. A desk officer shamed in the dust of combat training, it would have been forgotten by dinner. But Anna didn't move. She lifted her mug, took a slow sip, and met his eyes over the rim. A silence heavier than the mountains spread across the crowd. When she set the mug down, her voice carried clear, calm, undeniable. "You're right, Master Sergeant. It's not a spectator sport." The words cut the air clean in two. The crowd shifted, unease tightening around them. She had been challenged. Everyone could feel it. She could back down and vanish back into her numbers and crates, or she could step forward into his world, his arena, his rules. She didn't hesitate. "I'd like to run the course." Henderson's smirk curled wider, dripping with disbelief. Laughter bubbled from the crowd. A logistics major, mid-40s, running his course. It was theater. It was humiliation served up on a silver plate. "Be my guest," he sneered, drawing out each word like a knife. "Somebody get her a rifle and a medic. We might need one." The soldiers chuckled, anticipation thick in the air. They expected a disaster, a comedy routine. But when she unzipped her fleece jacket, folded it neatly, and revealed lean, corded muscle instead of softness, the laughter faltered. When Ortega returned with the rifle and helmet and she handled them with movements so fluid, so practiced, it silenced completely. Henderson felt it first, that sharp electric doubt. She stood at the entrance of the kill house, helmet secure, rifle ready. Her body wasn't tense. It was relaxed, coiled, focused not on the crowd, not on Henderson, but on the dark doorway ahead. "Timer on you," she said, voice low. And before anyone could process the shift, before Henderson could gather his arrogance back around him, she whispered, "Go." Then she vanished into motion. She didn't storm, she flowed. She didn't waste steps, didn't bleed seconds, didn't chase speed with noise. She moved like silence weaponized, like efficiency distilled into flesh. Each shot crisp, precise, merciless. Pop, pop. Targets down before the echo had time to die. She hugged walls, sliced corners, pivoted with the inevitability of a storm. Soldiers held their breath as she cleared the first floor in half the time of their best men. Upstairs, she was faster, still faster, but not rushed. The kind of fast that came from discipline so deep it had become instinct. One by one, the final targets fell. And when she emerged back into the cold mountain air, her breathing was steady, controlled. She unclipped her helmet, handed the rifle back to Ortega, and stood silent before Henderson. "Time, Master Sergeant." His thumb hovered frozen over the stopwatch. He stared at the numbers like they were written in another language. His voice cracked when it came. 54 seconds. The silence that followed wasn't shock. It was revelation. She had shattered his record by half a minute, obliterated it. And then, without ceremony, she picked up her fleece, slung it over her arm and walked back toward the depot, leaving behind a crater where their assumptions used to be. Why did silence feel heavier than applause? The kill house had emptied hours ago, but the echo of it lingered. Soldiers whispered in the barracks, in the chow line, even in the latrines. 54 seconds. A number carved into the concrete of their minds. It wasn't just a record, it was an earthquake. Some swore she'd moved faster than their eyes could track. Others claimed she'd barely breathed at all. The story mutated as it spread, exaggerations bloomed like wildfire, but no one dared strip away the core truth. Major Anna Sharma, the ghost in logistics, had humiliated the king of their kill house. And yet she acted as though nothing had happened. The very next morning she was back in the depot, pen scratching across manifests, her voice quiet but precise as she cross-checked items against their destinations. No mention of the run, no crowing, no smugness, only the same steady rhythm of order carving itself into chaos. That unsettled them even more. If she had strutted through the mess hall, if she had gloated, the soldiers could have folded her back into their hierarchy. But she didn't. She stacked boxes. She asked questions. She worked late into the freezing nights. And so they began to watch her differently, no longer ignoring her, no longer dismissing her. They studied her, the way one studies an unmarked weapon, unsure whether to admire it or fear it. Private Ortega felt it most. He couldn't walk across the yard without someone pulling him aside. What did she say before she went in? How did she hold the rifle? Was it true she didn't even look tired? Ortega tried to answer, but his words stumbled over the truth. She hadn't looked like anyone else he'd ever seen. She hadn't looked human exactly. She looked inevitable. Henderson took it like a wound. He had built his authority on being the apex predator, the fastest, the strongest, the one who could outpace every soldier under his charge. Now in front of all of them he had been dethroned. He stopped running drills, stopped joking, stopped looking anyone in the eye. When he crossed paths with her on the dusty pathways, he turned his head away. It wasn't just anger, it was confusion. He was a hammer and she had shown him a shape that wasn't a nail. Colonel Thorne heard the news within the hour. At first he dismissed it as gossip. A major in her 40s had broken Henderson's record by 30 seconds. Impossible. Then the reports stacked, consistent from every angle. Henderson himself confirmed it, his voice stripped of bluster, his eyes hollow. 54 seconds. Thorne closed his office door and pulled her file again. He stared at it longer this time. The pages were sterile, almost deliberately so. Logistics, supply chain optimization. 10 years of vague staff positions. And then the void, detached duty. A black hole in her career where words should have been. He had assumed it was bureaucracy. Now it looked more like a curtain. Who was she? He began watching her himself. She didn't change. She didn't seek him out. But he noticed the way she traced her fingers over topographical maps when she thought no one was looking, how her eyes lingered on the guard towers, nodding fields of fire, how she walked the perimeter with the unhurried rhythm of someone measuring distances in her head. She never boasted. She never explained. She simply observed as if her mind was always playing a game no one else could see. He hated mysteries, and yet he couldn't shake the sense that hers might matter. The base changed around her. In the chow hall, conversations dipped when she walked in. Young soldiers straightened in their seats. Some stared, wide-eyed, their expressions caught between awe and fear. A few avoided her entirely, unable to reconcile the image of a desk major with the legend she had just birthed. But the most striking change was in Henderson. When the drills resumed, his philosophy began to shift. His voice was still thunder, his insults still brutal, but new words slipped in. Efficiency, economy, slice the pie. His soldiers listened differently now because every one of them had seen what efficiency truly looked like. He didn't use her name, he didn't need to. Not bad, he'd bark after a strong run, but it was kestrel fast. The word carried itself across the base, at first whispered, then spoken with reverence. Kestrel. Her call signed from another life, though none of them knew it yet. For Anna, the whispers meant nothing. She hadn't come here to impress anyone. She had come to work. And yet, late at night in her quarters, she sat alone, coiling and recoiling the thin black rope she kept in her duffel. Her hands moved with unconscious precision, each loop falling perfect, as though order was the only thing keeping her together. She hadn't told them why she moved the way she did. She hadn't told them what her hands remembered or what her body carried. She hadn't told them about the mountains or the ghosts. Not yet. The test came sooner than anyone expected. It didn't start with a gunshot. It started with static. The Sparrowhawk drone, one of the most advanced reconnaissance tools in the arsenal, went silent mid-flight. Not shot down, not jammed. The violent rotor wash of a gunship had twisted it into a death spin, sending it crashing into the jagged scar of Alton Gorge. The moment the signal blinked off the screen, panic ignited. The Sparrowhawk wasn't just a drone. It carried encrypted data, new generation link hardware, and high-resolution imagery of insurgent networks stretching across provinces. If it was captured, the enemy wouldn't just gain intelligence, they'd gain leverage. Lives would unravel. Missions would collapse. In the command tent, Thorne loomed over the glowing holographic map. His jaw clenched, his voice sharp. Options, now. A quick reaction force by helicopter, 6 hours minimum, with heavy contact expected. Too slow, too visible. A high-altitude jump. Suicide in those winds. Air strikes. The wreckage would scatter. The data module could survive the blast and fall into enemy hands anyway. Every plan was a hammer, and the gorge demanded a scalpel. Anna stood silent at the back of the tent. She hadn't been summoned for her opinion, only to log the loss of an expensive asset. But as the officers' voices rose, frantic and overlapping, she stepped forward. She placed a finger on the northern wall of the gorge, a sheer vertical cliff, over 2,000 feet of bare rock. A line no one had dared to trace. There, she said, her voice calm. The room went still. The operations officer shook his head. That's impossible, ma'am. It's a technical climb, class 5, vertical. No patrols because no one can climb it. It's impassable. Not impassable, Anna corrected, her tone gentle but unyielding. Difficult. Her hand slid down the map, tracing an invisible path. High-angle traverse from here. Direct rappel to the wreckage. You bypass the valley floor entirely. No enemy contact. Thorne stared at her, weighing the madness of the idea against the certainty in her eyes. It was brilliant. It was suicidal. And it was the only plan that wasn't doomed before it began. That's a specialist's route, Major, he said, voice low. We don't have mountain warfare units here. Who do you propose makes that climb? Anna met his gaze without flinching. I can. The silence that followed was suffocating. Officers shifted in disbelief. Thorne studied her face, searching for arrogance, for bravado, for the faintest trace of bluff. He found none, only that same unnerving calm that had unsettled him from the moment she arrived. You can, he repeated. You're a logistics officer. I am a logistics officer now, sir, she said, but I can make that climb. The implication was clear. She had been something else before, something far sharper. Thorne's heart pounded in his chest. Every option on the table was madness, but hers carried a sliver of hope. He made his choice. You won't go alone, he ordered. His eyes swept the room, landing on the one soldier he knew had already followed her once. Ortega, you're with her. The private froze, face pale, but snapped to attention. Yes, sir. Retrieve the data module, nothing else. Do not engage unless you have no choice. Anna nodded once, understood. And with that, the ghost of the depot began preparing for a climb that no one else dared imagine. And the colonel, packing his office in silence, demanded the truth about who he had just unleashed. How do you climb a wall no one else believes can be climbed? The helicopter blades beat against the night like a war drum, shoving frigid air into their faces. The mountains loomed beneath them, jagged shadows under the cold light of a waning moon. Ortega sat pressed against the bulkhead, knuckles white against the rifle in his lap, his breath shallow and fast. Anna sat beside him motionless, eyes closed, breathing slow. The contrast gnawed at Ortega. His own heart was galloping, every muscle tight with anticipation, but she could have been meditating. The rope and carabiners laid across her lap looked like extensions of her body. Custom gear. Black, unreflective, not standard issue, not supply room stock. When the bird dipped low toward the drop zone, she opened her eyes. Calm. Focused. As if the sheer wall of rock ahead was no threat at all but a language only she could read. 5 minutes, the crew chief shouted. Ortega swallowed. His mouth was dry. "Ma'am, how are we supposed to?" His words trailed as his eyes followed the cliff rising before them, a wall of black stone that disappeared into the stars. Anna adjusted the strap on her harness, checked the knots by touch. "One handhold at a time, Private," she said softly. "That's how." The helicopter flared, skids brushing snow. The night swallowed them the instant they jumped. Rotors thundered away, leaving only silence and wind. Ortega stood frozen at the base of the cliff. His chest rose and fell in ragged bursts. He couldn't even find a foothold. But Anna moved with uncanny familiarity, fingertips brushing stone, eyes searching for edges and cracks like she'd been here before. She clipped into the rope, tested the anchor with practiced force, then began to climb. Her movements were fluid, not rushed, each step deliberate, each grip chosen. She didn't fight the mountain, she negotiated with it. The rope slithered upward, disappearing into the dark, her presence swallowed by stone and sky. Ortega cursed under his breath, then forced his hands to move. She had shown him how to tie his knots, how to test them 3 times. He trusted her voice replaying in his memory, "Trust your gear, but verify it first." He climbed. The cliff pressed cold against his chest, his arms trembling from strain. He slipped once, heart leaping into his throat, but her rope caught him steady, unshaken. Above him, her voice drifted down, calm and certain. "Left foot higher, Private, by your knee. Solid hold there, breathe. Don't fight the altitude, let it in slowly." Her words were anchors in the void. Hours blurred. The cliff became an endless dialogue between fear and determination. Ortega's muscles burned, his fingers raw. But whenever he faltered, she was there, a steady silhouette against the moonlit stone, her movements efficient, almost graceful. By the time they crested the summit, the eastern sky was graying with the promise of dawn. Below them, the wreckage of the Sparrowhawk glimmered faintly in the gorge, twisted metal scattered among ice and stone. And worse, headlights approached from the east. Enemy trucks. Time was bleeding away. Anna anchored the rappel line. Ortega watched in awe as she slipped over the edge, descending the vertical drop as though gravity had bent to her will. He followed, clumsy and terrified, but alive only because her voice kept guiding him down. "One more breath, one more hold, don't think about the fall." Far away, back in the base, Colonel Thorne paced like a caged animal. The command tent was dark except for the glow of his terminal. No comms from the team. Anna had insisted on radio silence. He had nothing but the clock. Each passing minute dug claws into his chest. Lieutenant Chun burst in, tablet in hand, face pale. "Sir, I got it." Thorne snatched the device, scrolling. The file was heavier this time. Less redaction, more words, enough to draw blood. Commendations for valor. Operations deep behind enemy lines. Solo reconnaissance in high-altitude zones. And then the designation. 77th Special Tactics Group. A unit spoken of in whispers, a ghost battalion. The kind of operators sent where no map existed, where missions were deniable, where survival was improbable. Her specialization, high-altitude infiltration, solo reconnaissance. Her call sign, Kestrel. Thorne froze. The name was a legend. He'd heard it whispered when he was still a junior officer, stories dismissed as myths. The operator who climbed mountains no one else dared, who disappeared into glaciers for weeks, who struck and vanished. The Alpine Ghost. And then the final entry, Operation Winter Sun. Details blacked out, but one line visible, mission successful, all assets lost, except Kestrel. Thorne's breath caught. He scrolled again. Severe frostbite, 4 days without sleep, carried the asset and 2 fallen teammates 20 miles through blizzard terrain, recommended for Distinguished Service Cross, transferred to Logistics Command for medical and psychological reasons. Buried, hidden, put on a shelf. Thorne dropped into his chair, staring at the holographic map. Somewhere in the freezing dark, a ghost from old war stories was climbing a cliff no one else dared, and he had almost dismissed her as dead weight. He pressed the intercom. "Get me General Peterson's aide, now." Moments later, the voice crackled through, impatient, irritated. "Colonel Thorne, do you have any idea?" "What happened at Winter Sun?" Thorne cut in, his voice sharp, raw. Silence, a heavy sigh, then words delivered like eulogies. "They were ambushed on exfil, 10 times their number. She held the pass for 7 hours so her team could escape. They didn't make it. She carried the intel and 2 bodies across a frozen range. Alone. That mission broke her. They reassigned her to logistics. Thought it was a quiet way to let her finish her career." The line went dead. Thorne sat motionless, the weight of truth settling in. She wasn't a paper pusher. She wasn't even just a soldier. She was a legend they had tried to bury in manifests and crates. And now she was out there again, climbing into the teeth of death because no one else could. Back in the gorge, dawn's light revealed the wreckage in sharp relief. The Sparrowhawk lay crumpled against stone, shards scattered like bones. 2 enemy trucks ground closer on the valley floor. Anna reached the wreck, clipped in, and pulled free the encrypted module. No wasted movements, no hesitation. Every second counted. Ortega, panting, pointed toward the headlights. "They're coming, ma'am." She glanced up. Calm, not fear, not even urgency, just the quiet recognition of inevitability. "We're faster," she said. And as bullets began to echo through the gorge, she pulled Ortega onto the rope and started the climb back into the fatting shadows of night. What does courage look like when there's no time left? The gorge cracked awake with gunfire. Bullets tore chips from stone, sparks skittering across the wreckage of the Sparrowhawk. Ortega's chest heaved, panic pounding in his ears. The trucks had stopped below, insurgents spilling into the rocks with rifles raised. Their shouts ricocheted off the cliffs, echoing in a dozen directions. Anna crouched over the drone's broken shell, movements methodical. Her hands didn't shake as she pried loose the encrypted module. She slipped it into a pouch against her chest, tugged the zipper closed. Then she looked at Ortega, calm as snowfall. "On the rope," she said. He stared at her. "They'll see us." "They already do." She clipped into the rappel line, checked Ortega's harness with a tug, and shoved him toward the rope. "Climb, I'll cover." Gunfire cracked again, closer now. Ortega's pulse hammered against his ribs as he scrambled upward. His boots slipped on the rock, hands raw against the rope. Every shout below drove him faster. But beneath the panic was her voice, steady as an anchor. "Breathe, don't waste movement. Small steps, trust the line." He focused on her tone more than her words. Calm, precise. She wasn't rushing him. She was guiding him, even as rounds slapped against stone inches from her helmet. Anna moved differently. She didn't waste bullets. Pop, pop, 2 insurgents crumpled at the base of the cliff. She shifted her stance, rifle steady, her profile vanishing against the shadowed rock. Every shot measured. Every second bought for the private above her. Ortega climbed, his breath ragged, but her voice carried through the roar of fear. "Left knee higher. Don't fight gravity. Work with it." By the time he reached the ledge, his arms trembled like rubber. He collapsed against the stone, chest heaving, but dared to look back. What he saw burned itself into him. Anna was still on the wall, halfway up, the rappel line taut. Insurgents below scrambled into cover, firing wildly. She didn't flinch. She flowed upward, pausing only to fire controlled bursts. A ghost on the rock face, rising inch by inch against gravity, against time, against death itself. Ortega wanted to shout encouragement, but the sound caught in his throat. She didn't need it. She climbed like someone who had done this 1,000 times because she had. At the summit, she hauled herself over the lip, boots crunching on frost, rifle sweeping before she even stood. Silence pressed in, broken only by Ortega's gasps. The trucks below were still, the insurgents regrouping. They had minutes, maybe less. Anna crouched beside Ortega, her breath steady, eyes on the horizon. "We move north. No tracks, no sound, stay close." He nodded, too winded to speak. They disappeared into the rocks just as the first wave of enemies reached the wreckage. Shouts echoed upward, furious, confused. Bullets sparked against stone, but Anna's route zigzagged through shadows, each step calculated to avoid sightlines. Ortega followed, stumbling but alive, clinging to her pace like it was a lifeline. Back at FOB Nightingale, Colonel Thorne sat rigid in his office, every muscle wound tight. No word, no signal, just silence. His officers hovered at the edges of the room, restless. Henderson leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his usual bluster absent. Even he looked uneasy. Thorne's eyes bored into the map. Every tick of the clock stretched like wire pulled to breaking. He had sent them. He had gambled on a ghost from old war stories, and now he had nothing but silence. He thought of her file, the redactions, the whispered call sign, the aide's weary voice recounting winter sun, how she had held off an army alone, how she had carried her dead through snow and storm. Broken, they had called her, too sharp, too scarred to keep wielding. But what if broken wasn't the word? What if it was something else entirely? He pushed the thought away, jaw set. All he could do now was wait. On the ridge above the gorge, Anna and Ortega moved like shadows. The wind cut through their gear, bitter and sharp. Snow crunched faintly under Ortega's boots, but Anna's steps left almost no sound, as if the mountain itself accepted her presence. Ortega's mind spun. Fear, exhaustion, awe. He had seen soldiers fight before. He had seen courage. But this was different. She wasn't fueled by adrenaline. She wasn't pushing against fear. She was aligned, each decision precise, each movement inevitable. Finally, when the valley dropped out of sight behind them, Anna paused. She scanned the horizon, then lowered to one knee. Ortega dropped beside her, lungs still dragging in air. "They'll track us," he whispered. "They'll try," she said. For the first time, he noticed the faintest tremor in her hands, not from fear, from memory. Her gaze lingered on the rope coiled at her side, on the frost clinging to its fibers. He saw something in her eyes then, not calm, not calculation, something older. He didn't have a word for it, but it felt like grief. Before he could ask, she blinked and the mask returned. She pulled her compass, checked bearings, and motioned north. "We keep moving." Hours bled into one another. By the time they reached the extraction point, the eastern horizon was aflame with sunrise. The helicopter roared in low, rotors chopping the thin air. Ortega stumbled toward it, relief flooding his chest. Anna waited. She scanned the ridges, the valley, every shadow. Only when she was sure did she climb aboard. Back at base, the rotors had barely stopped before she strode into the command tent. Ortega trailed behind, pale and exhausted, but alive. She pulled the encrypted module from her pouch and set it on Colonel Thorne's desk with quiet finality. "Recovered," she said, "nothing more." Then she turned, left Ortega to the stunned stares of the staff, and walked out into the morning chill. The silence she left behind was crushing. Thorne stared at the module as though it were proof of some impossible truth. Henderson stood stiff, jaw tight, eyes lowered. No one spoke. Because everyone in that room understood something fundamental. Anna Sharma hadn't just completed the mission. She had done it in a way no one else alive could. And she had done it without asking for recognition. That night in the mess hall, every eye followed her. Soldiers hushed mid-sentence as she entered, tea steaming in her hand. Ortega sat nearby, pride and disbelief fighting inside him. Henderson lifted his mug in a wordless salute. She met his eyes for the first time, and just for a moment, a genuine smile touched her lips. Colonel Thorne entered minutes later, striding straight to her table. The room went dead silent. Anna started to rise, protocol etched into her bones, but Thorne lifted a hand, stopping her. Then, with precision that seemed carved from stone, he brought his hand to his brow and held a formal salute. Not casual, not perfunctory, a salute of equals. The entire hall held its breath. Anna looked at him, expression unreadable. Then she gave a single, brief nod, the acknowledgement exchanged, the moment sealed. The colonel dropped his hand, turned and left the hall. Conversations erupted again, but quieter now, more respectful, more reverent. The myth of Kestrel was no longer whispered. It was alive, sitting at a corner table with a steaming cup of tea. And for the first time since her arrival, Anna allowed herself a breath of ease. Not pride, not triumph, something quieter, the dignity of knowing she hadn't needed to say a word. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Why was the mess hall quieter now, every time she walked in? Respect has its own gravity. You could feel it in the way voices dipped when Major Anna Sharma entered a room. You could hear it in the silence that lingered too long, not hostile anymore, but reverent. The young soldiers who once dismissed her as dead weight now shifted in their seats, suddenly self-conscious in her presence. But she gave them nothing to feed on, no smirk, no swagger. She returned to her tray, her tea, her corner seat. She ate the same meals, rose at the same hours, worked the same long shifts in the depot, as though nothing had changed. And yet everything had. The supply sergeant, once cynical and overwhelmed, now followed her lead with almost military precision. Boxes that had been abandoned in chaotic stacks were now lined, labeled, tracked. Specialists who used to drag their feet began volunteering for shifts, eager to prove themselves under her quiet gaze. Within weeks, the infamous 17% loss rate had dropped to less than 1. The depot hummed with a rhythm it had never known. Efficiency was its own kind of victory. The soldiers whispered about her still, but their tone had changed. They weren't mocking anymore. They were telling stories. The kill house run, the impossible climb, the way she had guided Ortega back from the edge of panic, the way Colonel Thorne himself had saluted her in the hall. Myths grew, of course, they always did. Some swore she had cleared the kill house blindfolded. Others said she carried the Sparrowhawk on her back. Ortega would shake his head, but he didn't argue. He knew the truth was already bigger than the lies. Henderson, the drill master, bore the change most visibly. For days after his humiliation, he had avoided her eyes, but slowly he began to adapt. His drills returned. His voice thundered once more, but his words had shifted. He still spoke of speed, still barked about violence of action, but now he also spoke of angles, of efficiency, of economy. "Don't just move fast," he would roar. "Move right, that's how you shave seconds, that's how you stay alive. Fast is nothing without smart." And at the end of every drill, when a recruit ran particularly well, Henderson would give a short nod and mutter, "Not bad, but it's not Kestrel fast." He never used her name. He didn't have to. The call sign had become legend among the ranks. Anna herself ignored it. She worked. She taught by doing, not by telling. And when soldiers cornered her with questions, she deflected with a small, unreadable smile. She wasn't hiding from their reverence, she simply didn't need it. Colonel Thorne, though, felt the weight of her presence in a different way. He had misjudged her once, and it gnawed at him. The file had told him one story, the woman before him told another. He had seen her climb into the teeth of the gorge, seen her return with the module that could have cost lives across provinces. He had saluted her publicly because anything less would have been dishonor. But privately, he needed her. He began calling her into his office for briefings, at first under the guise of logistics reports, but soon the conversations shifted. He would unroll a topographical map across his desk, tap a ridge line or a valley with his finger and ask, "What do you see here, Major?" She would study it in silence. Then softly, she would point out what no one else had noticed: the washouts that wouldn't show on satellite, the faint tracks that betrayed hidden routes, the quiet danger of a narrow pass that could choke a convoy into a death trap. Her answers weren't flamboyant, they were precise, and they unsettled him every time because they were always right. One evening, as dusk settled blue over the peaks, Thorne leaned back in his chair, studying her across the map. "You weren't meant for a desk," he said quietly. Anna didn't answer. She kept her eyes on the contour lines, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Winter sun," he said, testing the words. Her gaze flicked to him, sharp as a blade. He held her eyes. "I know enough, enough to understand you weren't broken. They just didn't know where to put you." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then Anna spoke, her voice low. "They put me where I couldn't do any more damage." Thorne frowned. "Damage?" Her gaze drifted to the window, to the jagged silhouette of the Hindu Kush cutting against the fading light. "Everyone carries what they've done, Colonel. Some carry it quietly. Others drag it like chains. The mountains don't care, but the people you leave behind do." Her tone wasn't defensive, it was reflective, worn. Thorne didn't press further. He recognized the edge of a cliff when he saw one. Some stories weren't meant to be forced. Instead, he gave a slow nod. "Whatever they buried, Major, it's not broken here. Here, it's exactly what we need." Anna inclined her head slightly, an acknowledgement, nothing more. But when she left, the silence she carried with her lingered long after the door shut. For the soldiers of FOB Nightingale, the weeks after the Sparrowhawk mission settled into a new equilibrium. Anna Sharma remained the logistics officer, but she was no longer invisible. She was different, a figure set slightly apart, like a mountain peak that drew every eye but remained unreachable. The younger soldiers began to guard her space instinctively, not because she asked, not because she demanded, but because some part of them understood she was carrying weight they couldn't see. Private Ortega felt it more than most. He followed her into the depot whenever he could, volunteering for shifts just to be near the quiet steadiness she carried. She had saved his life on the cliff, yes, but it wasn't just that. She had shown him what composure looked like when everything else fell apart. Sometimes, when they worked in silence, he would glance at her hands, scarred, steady, coiling rope with practiced rhythm. He wanted to ask about the ghost she carried, about what it meant to survive when others didn't. But he never did. Something in her silence told him the questions were already answered, just not for him. The legend of Kestrel grew. Henderson turned her run into the standard every soldier measured themselves against. Thorne began seeking her perspective before moving his pieces across the map, and the base itself, once dismissive, once blind, now bent unconsciously around her presence. But Anna herself remained unchanged. She hadn't come here for respect. She hadn't come for redemption. She had come because there was work to be done, and she still knew how to do it. At night, when the camp settled into uneasy sleep, she would walk alone to the edge of the base. She would stare at the mountains, rope coiled in her hands, looping and unlooping with quiet precision. The scars in her skin caught the moonlight, her breath fogged in the thin air. The mountains didn't ask for explanation. They didn't care who she had been or who she was now. They only cared whether she could climb. And in their silence, she found something close to peace. Why did the nightmares always come when the wind rose? The Hindu Kush had a way of howling through steel and canvas alike, a thin, keening cry that slipped into every crevice of FOB Nightingale. For most soldiers, it was background noise, a lullaby of discomfort. But for Major Anna Sharma, it was memory. She woke in her bunk without gasping, without thrashing. She simply opened her eyes, calm but sleepless, staring into the dark as the wind pressed against the walls. Her body didn't tremble, her breath didn't quicken, but her mind walked back. Snow blinding, a pass swallowed in storm, radio static cut to silence, shapes in the white, too many of them, too fast, her team pulling back, shouting over the wind. She remembered the sting of frost-splitting skin, the weight of the bodies when she lifted them one at a time because she couldn't leave them behind. 7 hours, alone, every shot counted, every second stretched thin. And then the silence when it was over. Her hand found the coil of rope by her bunk, the same thin black line she carried everywhere. She looped it once, twice, muscle memory steadying her heartbeat. In the depot, in the kill house, in the command tent, she was composed. But in the dark, the rope was what kept her anchored. Morning came with no sign of her wakefulness. She moved through the depot with her usual efficiency, her voice precise, her presence steady. But Ortega saw the faint shadows under her eyes. He said nothing. He had learned that her silences were not absence, they were choices. The base itself was restless. Intelligence reports of increased insurgent movement churned through the command tent. Patrols reported caches hidden in mountain caves, ambushes laid along forgotten goat trails. The enemy was adapting. Colonel Thorne found himself staring at maps more than ever, tracing routes with a finger that hesitated now where it once pressed firm. More than once, he called Anna into his office, gesturing her toward the maps. "What do you see?" he would ask. And each time, she leaned over the terrain with quiet intensity. She pointed out the passes the enemy would likely favor, the ridges that gave sightlines invisible to drones. She saw not just the geography, but the intent behind it. "You think like them," Thorne said once, not as an accusation but as a recognition. Her eyes flicked up calm. "I think like a mountain." It unnerved him, but it also steadied him. One night, over cold coffee and maps spread across the table, Thorne asked what had burned in his chest since the Sparrowhawk mission. "Winter sun," he said, the words heavy, almost reluctant. "You don't have to tell me, but I need to know what broke you." Anna was quiet for a long time. The tent was filled only with the hum of the generator, the distant clatter of boots outside. Finally she spoke, her voice low. "It wasn't the mission that broke me, Colonel. It was surviving it." Her gaze drifted to the map, but she wasn't seeing terrain. She was seeing snow and blood and the shadows of men who would never come back. "They sent us in light, too light. We were meant to be unseen. Extraction was supposed to be clean. But when the storm came, we weren't ghosts anymore. We were prey." Thorne didn't interrupt. He didn't look away. "They died believing I could get them out," Anna said. Her voice didn't shake, but each word landed like stone. "And I did, just not alive. I carried 2 of them back through 20 miles of ice. Carried them because the thought of leaving them behind was worse than dying. The brass called it valor. I called it failure." Silence settled again, heavy, honest. Thorne leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You carried them, alone, through a blizzard. You didn't fail them, Major. You honored them." Anna shook her head, just slightly. "Honor doesn't change the fact that they're gone." Her eyes lifted then, meeting his, calm but unflinching. "That's the part no one tells you. Surviving isn't the reward, it's the sentence." Thorne had no answer, only respect, a deeper respect than any salute could carry. The next mission came quickly, as if the mountains themselves refused to let her words linger. A supply convoy had gone dark along the northern pass. Last transmission, under fire. The terrain made aerial support impossible. Reinforcement would take hours. Thorne's staff argued options. Henderson pushed for sending a platoon, heavy and fast. Others suggested waiting for daylight. But Anna stood at the edge of the table, eyes on the contour lines. "They'll be overrun in minutes," she said softly. "A platoon will arrive too late. Air cover is useless in that canyon. The only chance is a fast, quiet team moving from the ridge." Thorne looked at her, You volunteering again?" Anna didn't answer directly. She simply tapped the ridge with her finger. "It's the only path." Henderson bristled. "That's suicide. The enemy dug in she'd be." "She'd be the only one who could get through," Ortega interrupted, voice trembling but steady. All eyes turned to him. His cheeks burned, but he pressed on. "I was with her in the gorge. I saw what she can do. If she says it's possible, it's possible." The tent fell into uneasy silence. Thorne studied Anna. She gave nothing away, her face as composed as ever, but her stillness was louder than any speech. Finally Thorne nodded. "You'll have your path, Major, but you won't walk it alone." Anna inclined her head. "Understood." Later, as she prepared her gear, Ortega hovered uncertain. "Ma'am," he said finally, his voice low, "why do you keep doing this? After winter sun, after everything, why not let it stay buried?" She paused, coiling her rope with perfect precision. Then she looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Because sometimes the only way to honor the dead," she said, "is to keep climbing." Her voice was steady, but when she looked down at the rope in her scarred hands, Ortega saw something else flicker in her eyes. Not pride, not hope. A burden carried in silence. What happens when silence is louder than orders? The canyon was a wound carved into the mountains, narrow and jagged, its floor littered with the wreckage of trucks and burning crates. Somewhere down there, the convoy was pinned, survivors crouched behind shredded metal, insurgents pressing from the cliffs above. Gunfire echoed in chaotic bursts, amplified by stone until it sounded like 1,000 rifles. Colonel Thorne stood over the holographic map, jaw locked tight. "We don't have time to assemble a platoon," he growled. "We send one, they arrive too late. If we do nothing, they're finished." Henderson slammed his fist against the table. "Then drop a hammer, airstrike the canyon, clear it all." Anna's voice cut through, quiet but steady. "Air won't work. The walls are too close. The concussion will kill our own before it kills theirs." All eyes shifted to her. She leaned over the map, fingertip tracing the ridgeline. "Here, a knife through the spine. A small team moving along the ridge. The insurgents won't expect an approach from above. We drop in behind their lines, clear them fast, extract survivors through the North Pass before reinforcements arrive." Silence stretched. Henderson shook his head. "Too thin, too exposed. You can't flank ghosts with a skeleton crew. That's suicide." Anna didn't flinch. "It's survival, but only if we move now." Thorne studied her face. That unnerving calm. That same stillness he'd seen when she returned from the gorge with the Sparrowhawk module. She wasn't guessing. She was remembering. Finally he nodded. "Take your team." Minutes later, under a moonless sky, Anna crouched on the ridgeline with Ortega at her side, Henderson grimly following behind with 2 riflemen. The sergeant hadn't liked the decision, but Thorne had ordered him to join. And so here he was, sweat freezing on his brow, eyes darting at every shadow. Anna moved first, silent, efficient. She didn't crawl, she flowed. Her boots barely disturbed the scree, her body folding into the contours of the ridge as though the rock itself sheltered her. Ortega mimicked as best he could, awkward but determined. Henderson lumbered, trying to match silence with muscle, the frustration showing in the set of his jaw. Half a mile in, the canyon opened below them, glowing orange from fires. Muffled screams drifted upward. The convoy's survivors were still alive for now. Insurgents clustered along the cliffs opposite, rifles trained downward, predators circling prey. Anna raised a hand, stopping the team. She studied the pattern of movement, the rhythm of the enemy's fire. "They're focused forward," she whispered. "Blind from above, we drop here." Henderson glared at her. "That's a 60-foot cliff." She clipped her rope to an anchor. "I've climbed higher in worse weather." Her gaze flicked to him, steady. "You can wait if you want." For the first time, Henderson had no retort. He just swallowed hard and clipped in after her. They descended like shadows. Anna first, smooth and silent, her rifle slung but ready. Ortega followed, clumsy but steadier than he had been in the gorge. Henderson came last, teeth gritted, every slip a battle against gravity. When Anna's boots touched stone, she moved instantly into cover, rifle up, eyes scanning. She raised 2 fingers, then pointed. Ortega nodded, adjusting his grip. Henderson exhaled through his nose, fury and awe tangled in his chest. Then they struck. Anna moved with lethal precision. Pop, pop, 2 insurgents dropped before they even knew death was near. Ortega fired next, his shots tight under her whispered guidance. Henderson roared as he charged, his hammer philosophy unleashed in brutal bursts. But it was Anna's scalpel that carved the way, her timing impeccable, her path inevitable. The insurgents panicked, fire scattered, directionless. The trapped convoy soldiers seized the opening, returning fire with desperate fury. "Move now," Anna ordered, her voice sharp for the first time all night. She surged forward, clearing a path through the chaos. Henderson covered with sheer volume, but Anna's precision carved seconds from death. By the time they reached the convoy survivors, smoke and dust cloaked the canyon. Wounded men and women stared at Anna as though she were an apparition. She didn't stop. She grabbed one soldier by the collar, hauling him to his feet. "On your feet. North Pass. Move." Henderson's booming voice followed. "You heard the major. Move your asses." The survivors stumbled, bleeding but alive, pushing toward the narrow exit Anna had chosen. The insurgents regrouped, shouts cutting through smoke. More were coming. Too many. Ortega's rifle clicked dry. Panic surged. He fumbled for a new mag, hands shaking. Anna dropped beside him, calm as ever, firing 3 clean shots that bought him time. "Breathe," she said, reloading for him with motions faster than his eyes could follow. "Control the weapon. Don't let it control you." Something steadied in him at her tone. His fear bent but didn't break. He fired again, his rounds finding targets. They moved in staggered retreat, Anna covering angles no one else even saw, Henderson laying down thunderous bursts, Ortega fighting to match their pace. Step by step, they carved a path to the North Pass. When the canyon finally spat them into open air, dawn bled across the peaks. The survivors collapsed against stone, coughing, gasping, clinging to life they hadn't expected to keep. Anna stood at the edge of the pass, scanning the horizon. Calm, silent, rifle steady. She didn't celebrate, she didn't exhale in relief. She simply watched, ensuring the mountains didn't take back what she had stolen. Henderson trudged up beside her, sweat streaking his face, chest heaving. He studied her profile, the scarred hands steady on the weapon, the eyes that seemed older than the peaks themselves. He swallowed hard. "You weren't lucky in that kill house, were you?" Anna didn't answer. Henderson gave a humorless chuckle, shaking his head. "Hell, you're not logistics. You're a ghost they stuffed in a uniform." Still she said nothing. But when the survivors were finally lifted out, when the canyon grew quiet again, Henderson lifted his hand in the faintest of gestures. Not a salute, not quite, just an acknowledgement, a soldier's nod. And Anna returned it, a fraction of a nod, brief but enough. Later, back at the FOB, Ortega sat in the mess hall, words spilling from his mouth before he could stop them. He told anyone who would listen how she had led them through the canyon, how she had moved like silence weaponized, how every shot mattered. His voice carried awe, but also something softer. Respect. Gratitude. Anna, sitting alone at her table with her tea, let the stories ripple. She didn't correct them. She didn't encourage them. She simply sat in silence, the steam rising in the chill air. And in her silence, the legend grew. But in the quiet corners of her mind, as she coiled her rope again that night, winter sun returned. Faces half buried in snow. Voices cut short by storm. She remembered the weight of their bodies against her back, the endless white. And though the base now saw her as unshakable, Anna Sharma knew the truth. She didn't carry only rope. She carried ghosts. Why do legends never speak for themselves? Weeks after the convoy rescue, FOB Nightingale found its rhythm again. Patrols resumed. Radios crackled with the same clipped jargon. Meals were still gray, tasteless, swallowed in noisy halls, but something beneath the surface had changed. It was in the way soldiers carried themselves, in the way recruits whispered when her name surfaced, in the way Henderson barked about efficiency now instead of brute force, in the way Colonel Thorne lingered over maps, waiting for her quiet input before making final calls. And it was in Ortega most of all. He had started carrying rope in his pack, not regulation, just a length of climbing cord frayed and faded, coiled neatly. When asked why, he shrugged, but inside he knew. It wasn't just rope, it was memory. A symbol of the night he learned that silence could be stronger than noise. That survival wasn't always chaos and adrenaline. Sometimes it was calm. Sometimes it was one step, one hold, one breath at a time. Anna didn't notice the shift in him directly. She wasn't looking for it. She wasn't looking for anything. She still rose before dawn, still walked the depot aisles with her clipboard, still stacked order out of chaos until even the messiest of crates looked like a plan. She still sat in the corner of the mess hall with her tea, letting conversations dip and swirl around her without reaction. She hadn't come for recognition. She hadn't come for redemption. She had come because there was work and she still knew how to do it. But recognition found her anyway. The soldiers no longer ignored her. They gave her space, yes, but it wasn't dismissal anymore. It was respect, reverence even, a space carved out for someone different, someone who had walked further into the dark than they ever would. Henderson carried it differently. He never said her name. He didn't have to. His kill house drills were punctuated with the phrase that had become his mantra, not kestrel fast. His men groaned, cursed, pushed harder. They would never reach her time. He knew it. They knew it. That wasn't the point. The point was that the standard existed. Colonel Thorne carried it in silence too. He never spoke of Winter Sun again, never revealed what he had read in those redacted lines. But when he looked at her across the map table, there was no doubt in his eyes anymore. He didn't see dead weight. He didn't see a misfiled major. He saw what the mountains had taught him to see, something quiet, sharp, and absolutely necessary. One evening, after another long day of reports and reorganized supply chains, Anna walked to the edge of the base. The sun had set behind the peaks, leaving only indigo sky and a sliver of pale moon. The air was thin, biting cold, carrying the faintest echo of that mountain wind. In her hands, as always, was the rope. She coiled it slowly, rhythmically, each loop precise, each motion practiced, a meditation more than a task. Her hands bore the scars of years, frostbite, rope burn, old fractures healed into new strength. The rope slipped through them like a conversation between old friends. Ortega found her there once, but he didn't approach. He stood at a distance, watching, understanding that this was not a moment meant to be interrupted. He saw the way her face softened in the moonlight, not hardened, not armored, but quiet, almost at peace. For Anna, the rope was more than gear. It was history. It was survival. It was the line that had held her through storms and silence, through failure and survival. It had carried her comrades back when only memory remained. It had lowered her into darkness and raised her back into light. It was her partner, her witness, her burden. She knew the soldiers whispered her call sign now. Kestrel. She knew they had built a myth around her, but she didn't carry the myth. She carried the rope and the ghosts. Sometimes, when the wind cut just right, she swore she could still hear their voices in it, the team from Winter Sun, laughing, shouting, fighting. The ones she had carried through the storm, only to bury them in snow. She didn't flinch at the memory anymore. She didn't run from it. She let it stand beside her, silent, like the mountains themselves. Because legends weren't about glory. They weren't about victory. They were about weight, about carrying what others could not. The soldiers of FOB Nightingale would never know the full story. They would never see the frostbitten hands dragging two bodies through snow. They would never hear the silence of 7 hours on a mountain pass with only death for company. They would never understand the price of surviving when no one else did. But they didn't need to. They had her example, the efficiency in her work, the steadiness in her voice, the silence that carried more than speeches ever could. One evening in the mess hall, Ortega caught her eye across the room. For just a second he thought he saw something flicker there. Not a smile exactly, not sorrow either, something in between, a recognition, a passing of weight. He didn't approach, he didn't need to. The legend of Kestrel wasn't hers to tell. It wasn't hers to carry anymore. It belonged to them, to the soldiers who whispered her name before drills, to the private who coiled his rope at night, to the commander who finally sought her counsel, to the sergeant who admitted speed meant nothing without precision. Anna Sharma, major, logistics officer, survivor, ghost, sat in silence. She had no need to explain herself. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And in that silence, in that unshakable steadiness, a legend lived on.